Ladies and gentlemen, my name is xcom, and in today's video we're going to be touching on and talking about Mechanicus. This game is one of XCOM's children, I would say, much like Mutant Year Zero, and it's lovely to see that it's grown up to become its own thing. This game is very XCOM-ish, and this video is going to be talking about that ish, outlining what exactly the game does different so you know what to expect. To start off with, I will briefly touch on graphics, animations, ragdoll physics, etc. and system stability, because it's always important within the game. Obviously you're going to be looking at the graphics for the whole time of this video, as I'll be showcasing lots of footage, but I'd like to give my own view that I really feel that this is consistent with the current 40k aesthetic direction. Yes, you could argue it's a little bit more Blizzard and a little bit brighter perhaps than 40k of years gone past, but for me I find this somewhat more visually pleasing and I like the aesthetic personally. When it comes to actual weapon animations and visuals, I feel that this is something the game's actually done very well. It ties in very well with the sound and the ragdoll physics for some very impressive weapon animations. Despite the fact that there's some 50 or so different unique weapons within the game, each of the ones I've used thus far, which is somewhere in the region of 10, each has its own unique vibe and feeling, and you could almost go so far as saying you might even learn to recognise them as you go along. As well as this, I should pay a little bit of extra attention to the crit mechanic, which is when you do a crit, quite obviously, which not only prevents Necron from healing, but also provides some absolutely wonderful ragdoll physics, and this can send a unit absolutely flying. It's a little bit comical, but it's a really nice way to break up combat and provide an extra little visual treat every now and again. Now in terms of audio as well, again I have mentioned that this is very nice and consistent from weapon to weapon. By that I mean consistently different from weapon to weapon. There's not too much overlap, and I found all of them, I would say, fitting thus far, with some very satisfactory sounds when firing some of the more impressive weapons. But special attention needs to go to the background music composer wherever you are. Job well done. League of Legends may have some flashy video and blah, some K-pop blah blah, but we have motherfucking techno omniscient science, and it sounds awesome. Really good job to the background music in this, and I would say this is worthy of listening to on a drive home. And I'll give a little shout out now to the fact that the digital soundtrack as such comes with only, I think, spending an extra $3 to $4 to get the premium edition for this game. Just before we go into game mechanics, I also want to make note that this is one of the few 40k titles that actually feels like it's not grossly overpriced. This game is currently rocking around the £20 mark. I think it's just above that. I think it's around £25 for the special edition, which contains a book and a soundtrack, as well as an in-game item for melee, which, okay, fair enough. It doesn't cost too much extra, but this game actually feels well priced for where it is, which is a rarity for games of the Games Workshop IP, and it's something refreshing to see. Something else has joined the club, as well as Vermintide 2, in being the fairly good value for money club. Not many of you in there right now. Now, in terms of in-game mechanics, what you guys have actually come here for to learn about what makes this game different. Well, in terms of in-game mechanics, the most important thing to make note of is the fact that they've done away with the cover system, firstly. This means that the gameplay is more dynamic, and from a developer interview, it was taken from, or inspired by, one of the recent Doom games, where doing away with cover and providing players with an incentive to get into combat produced a more fluid gameplay experience, and I can actually see a little bit of that within Mechanicus. It's not like Doom, it's not a first-person shooter, but there is not a lot of incentive to sit there and hide. There's no Overwatch stance for your characters, so you need to go out there, get stuck in and do some shooting. And that, I feel, is a really nice way to actually change the pace from a traditional XCOM game. You won't be doing a lot of camping in this, waiting for enemies coming to you. You'll be wanting to use your action economy as much as you can to do as much damage as you can. And this really makes a very nice tempo to the game, and a very nice change from some of the perhaps slower paced titles out there. Now, as well as this, there is another mechanic which really separates this from the XCOMs. You have a 100% hit chance all the time. When you shoot something, you hit it. And you might be saying, whoa, that has just changed my view of this game entirely. That's right, RNG doesn't really feature into hitting an enemy. It does slightly in terms of damage variation when it comes to the weapon. This will vary depending on weapon to weapon. Some have a narrow range, some have a wider range. But this game really plays and feels a lot more like a game of chess. What they've done is they've given you a large amount of tools to use and a large amount of cross-interaction with these tools, and then it's a case of how the player uses these tools together to create a strategy to overcome a certain amount of damage that's going to be coming their way, or a certain amount of damage they need to do. Me personally, I like this. I feel this is a really good move. I feel that this is going to make a far more welcoming game to players wanting to come in and try an XCOM-like game. It's fair to say that games such as Mordheim were fantastic titles, brilliant games, but of course any game that features a large amount of RNG will feature a large amount of Steam forums dedicated to how terrible RNG and how broken it is. Oh my god, wow. Well, this game, I think we can safely say that that's going to be unlikely to happen, and that is, I personally feel, a good move for 40k fans to have a more welcoming experience. However, the tactics and the diversity and the decision making is still there to a degree. One of the tools that helps achieve this is the cognition mechanic. This is extra action economy that can either be used to fire particular weapons or to move further or do particular attacks. This is either gained by using a servo skull to examine a certain cognition point on the map, walking up to a cognition point, or allowing one of your servitors to get whacked. These are expendable troops, so don't you worry too much. This is a very nice mechanic, and it actually provides a little bit of resource management while playing, making this feel at times a little bit more like an RTS, which is a very interesting vibe to actually have within this, and I have to say it works very well for the game. A lot of weapons, a lot of items have cross-synergy simply for the task of resource management for your cognition. This is a very important stat, and you will need it to fire some of the more important weapons, and if you start off with 0 cognition in a map, you obviously won't be firing some of the more impressive weapons straight away. It's a very interesting mechanic. I have to say, adds something different, and it adds a unique feel to this, and overall I would say it's a net positive. So thus far, gameplay wise, very, very different, I would say, in terms of vibe. In terms of aesthetic as well, I feel that this is all congruent with this. You won't see too many over-the-shoulder action cameras, simply because an over-the-top view seems to be more suited to the game. This is according to the developers Anywho, who did admit that an action camera was possible, but didn't feel it was perhaps appropriate for the type of title. I'm actually inclined to agree here, although I really like within Mutant Year Zero having that third-person camera view where you're doing an amazing shot. At the same time, in a game that feels a little bit more like you're playing a board game or a chess game perhaps, having less of a focus on cinematics and theatricals and more of a focus on tactics and execution actually feels quite congruent with the game. I'm willing to let them off the hook for that. However, I think there are a couple of occasions where I wouldn't mind a little bit more slow motion during some of the crit ragdoll mechanics. They are kind of there, but I wouldn't mind getting a little bit more juice out of them because they really do look quite nice. Now, in terms of the actual gameplay, we need to touch on actual customization because there is quite a lot of choice. Just before we delve into customization for the classes, I want to touch on action economy, and action economy is how much you can do per turn within this game. You basically have a set amount of movement you can do as standard, and then you can gain extra by expending a single cognition point. You can also fire weapons independently of each other without taking away from your action economy. By this, I mean you could move, you could shoot, you could then move the rest of your turn, then you could do a melee, and then assuming you're not engaged in melee, you could fire another shot with your other rifle. Each weapon can be used once per turn, and this is a very interesting idea and concept. I found it really lends itself to actually equipping characters with multiple weapons, especially given the mechanic that once a Necron is downed, they will regenerate unless you attack them again, so more attacks is much preferable to having fewer attacks within this game that I can see within the early phases. Now, Moving to the tech tree in the top left hand side, we can start to dabble with some of the customization options available to characters within this game. Thus far, I have unlocked a few extra items and weapons by doing certain missions and completing certain actions within missions. You can see I have simple things like an extra axe, macadendrites, blast pistols. You'll notice for some of these they require cognition, so this one requires 1 point in order to use. Some of them will have a cooldown of a certain amount of turns, and after being fired for a certain amount of times, it varies per weapon, their machine spirit will get angry, and this will result in either a bonus or a negative, but it's quite interesting to see. Sometimes it will make an item more temperamental, other times it will give it something like a damage or a crit bonus. We also have quite a few support and utility items available. These again will use things like cognition, tend to have a slightly longer cooldown but allow you to create some more versatile characters. Things like a refractor field are an absolute godsend. Absorbing 8 damage to all allies within a certain range for 1 round is simply amazing. However, it will come at the cost that it requires 2 augment slots. We'll talk about those in a moment. You can also upgrade the amount of troops you can take. We'll touch base on troops in a moment. And you can also upgrade your ship. Ship upgrades represent universal upgrades, things like reducing overall costs, allowing you to carry more cognition as a total, and giving you access to a greater number of tech priests. Next up, if we go to the canticles, these are buffs. You can take up to 3 of them within a particular mission. And guess what? You unlock these by doing achievements, so there's actually incentive to do achievements. These are fairly simple and doable things, and I get the impression if you simply play the game, you will unlock them. They're quite simple, they're quite straightforward, but some of them are absolutely game-changing. Healing 10 hit points on an active unit, for example, incredibly powerful. If we go over to the cohort now, this is where we can view our troops. As you can see, we have access to 3 tech priests as standard. We can view our actual gear when we hover over them. We also have access to 3 different troops. Troops are expendable and very, very cheap. You can take them on a mission by using your total Blackstone. They are very cheap. A servitor, for example, costs something like 6. You can upgrade these by doing certain missions and milestones within the game, which will make your servitor level up. But for now, let's focus a little bit on the tech priests. Now here we are checking out Magos Chatsman. This is my group healer. So what we'll do is we'll go over to his disciplines and we'll check out what he's doing that makes him a decent healer. We've gone for the Engine Seer tree, which will give us a total active cleanse, allowing us to remove a negative effect. We've gone for restoring 1 hit point at the end of every turn. We've gone for an extra heal ability, which can be done at range by praying for someone. It makes sense because praying heals people. Curatio claws have a -1 cooldown. This is one of our tools we use for healing and restore extra hit points. This is exceptionally powerful, and we also have a canticle which we can use every 3 turns that heals all of our blimmin' tech priests. It's absolutely awesome to work towards. You also may unlock extra pieces of armor. This will come from the actual tree itself, and you can hover over each one of them to gain a rough idea of what it does, but you can also simply mouse over and see what the total benefits are. At present, I don't believe you can actually preview what the armor gives you. If we go back to here, you'll actually notice when you hover over the armor, it gives you a certain amount of stats. So if you want extra physical armor or energy armor, etc., you'll have to go out and actually start going into a tree to figure it out for now until some spreadsheets are available. But thus far, a good amount of customization available. In order to level up a character, you simply go on the discipline and you start from the top and you make a click and off you go. Unfortunately, I can't afford to. But if we move on to one other character now, we'll go through a few items just to give you a small demonstration as to what you could expect. Here on this character we have a phosphor blast pistol, and this allows us to reveal enemy statistics, showing us their health and armor values by shooting them. It also does a small amount of damage. We have armor, which gives us, surprisingly, armor and health, and as well as that we have a power axe which shreds armor, which is very nice and very handy, and also does a modest amount of damage. When an enemy moves away from melee, you also get an opportunity attack, so running into melee range with a ranged Necron is a very, very good idea within the early game. We also have something called Spotlight, which gives us extra armor and makes us into a priority target for an enemy, which I think is a wonderful mechanic. And we also have the Refractor Field to mitigate some damage. This only uses one augment slot. You can see at the top here, for each level you get one augment slot, and each one of these items can be placed into one of these. I would give a massive shout out here to self-healing. Reason being is that at the end of a mission you have to spend 10 of your Blackstone to restore a single hit point to a character. Now, you might be wondering, is there any permadeath within this actual game? Don't worry, there actually isn't, and some might say, whoa, that's not hardcore enough for me, but you simply pay to actually repair a unit, 10 of the resources per hit point lost. If you lose 3 of them and they have 10 hit points each, that's 300 resources gone. It's still going to set you back a fair bit, but there is a little bit of difficulty curve to the game. Going over to the mission screen, we can show you the actual level of difficulty here. Clicking on the bottom will generally load harder missions, and up the top you will slowly get easier and easier and easier, and each one will come with its own unique rewards as well as different enemy types. It's worth keeping an eye on. I think for the majority of people they'll be looking to do rewards based on the actual... willing to do actual missions based on the potential rewards, but for some they may simply choose to go for something based on canon. Now, that leads us very neatly to the exploration mechanic within this game, and just before we do so, we're going to load up a few units and we're going to deploy down on a mission, skip a little bit of text, and actually go through one of the major mechanics which may cause, I feel, a little bit of potential confusion to begin with. We will have a little bit of dialogue to skip, and it's worth mentioning that this is the form in which the story is presented within the game. Voice acting in a binary format, aka you won't understand it, mixed with text. Read it if you like. It's not necessary to actually play through the game, but this will then take you to a gaming screen. You will not always see where enemies are. This is let's consider it a treat for now. Now, you have a choice when orienteering on this map to either go to glyph locations sometimes, or you will have actual apostrophes or exclamation marks, because my English is apparently terrible. If we go to a glyph first, let's demonstrate. Right, we click on the glyph, and here we have 2 glyphs. Now, what you'll notice is each one of these will differ in its result. It is purely trial and error to figure out which one does what. I believe off the top of my head this one gives me extra resources. Let's find out. There you go. That is from memory. So I think it's fairly safe to say there's going to be a Wikipedia page probably up fairly soon with people exchanging which one does what. This is a trial and error case of learning the Necron language for the player. Some may do good things, some may do less good things. It is up to you to decide which one does which, and, well, to basically learn as you go. Now, as we move around the map, you will see the awaken level or awaken bar increase. Every movement you make will slowly fill up this bar, and if you choose certain tasks, it will fill up faster. Let's move on and I'll show you what I mean. Here we are with our first story event. Now, this is an interesting mechanic within the game, and I would liken it to something like RimWorld. You have a total of 700 different events that can occur, and they occur in strings. So what will happen is you will go down on a mission and you will get something like this, which is an element of the game's story. What you choose will determine what happens next. Your decisions are important. I cannot stress this enough. If you choose something dangerous, it will, in theory, or potentially increase the awaken level, which gives the enemies more buffs, potentially making more enemies as well, or you may get yourself a financial compensation for choosing something different. You're never going to learn all 700, although in theory someone could Wikipedia all of them, but it is worth considering and taking your time to make these choices. This is a mechanic I have mixed feelings on, as I don't feel every single player who buys the game will want to engage thoroughly with this mechanic. Some may find it frustrating that when you help someone and you find out that they're actually already dead, it may somewhat be disappointing. It is going to surprise you every now and again, and I would suggest to go into this with the expectation that every now and again it's going to throw you a curveball. This is not a system designed to give you buffs and debuffs. based on your in-game logic. Sometimes you will make a choice and think it's the right one, and it will go wrong. One rule of thumb I would say is anything that makes you dilly-dally will make the awaken level go up. Anything that makes you rush along will generally be better for you, but if it involves enemies, they might catch on to your position, so just be wary. Let's, for example, go with awareness. So we're going to warily search the chamber. Who knows what killed this unfortunate soul? As a result, I managed to get some resources and some cognition points for my next mission. This was lucky. What I could have found is a bunch of scarabs to try and bite my bum. Managed to get away with it this time. Next time I find this, I know that I want to actually search. I have a 1 in 700 chance of seeing it again, so basically I have no hope in hell of remembering this. But it's a feature that some players may like and some players may not. I personally feel it does break up the potential monotony of combat, and I do feel if you were in combat in this game and doing nothing else 24/7, then it would eventually get to the point where combat feels a little bit too repetitive, and it gives the players a nice break from doing so. However, you can find that you spend a large amount of time in these screens and missions, making these choices and reading and deciding on what to do. This is something I think is going to really appeal to some of you that like a little bit of role play within the game. However, I would say it does come at a cost. Those of you that just want to jump in the action are perhaps feeling a little bit, let's say, impatient like I was the other night, and you rush through, you might get bitten in the bum by making some poor choices, so it's something to be aware of. Now, moving on from here, I would say the actual combat itself, the actual gameplay and all of the mechanics do wrap together up to make a quite nice, customizable, interactive experience where you get to make your own squad and feel like you're choosing your own paths for them. There's multiple different tools, you can unlock them in multiple different orders, and it creates actually a very tactical experience. The fact it doesn't have a cover system or an Overwatch stance for your characters actually I feel is a plus for this game, as it really helps the continuity of combat. I'm really curious to see what you guys think. I will probably do a more comprehensive review once I've finished the game, or at least completed it a couple of times. I will be live streaming it copiously over the next couple of weeks, as well as doing a few tips and tricks videos. But I have to say, my hat's off to the developers for being brave enough to do something different with the XCOM theme, even though it's not really, it really is a world apart from XCOM in many ways, but it will be compared to it for basically because it has a camera similarity. But well done for trying to do something different, well done for making something that's actually decent value for money. I think you're going to feel hard-pressed to feel ripped off for 20 quid. I'm not sure it will be a game for absolutely everyone, but I do think it's going to be going down as perhaps one of the better 40k titles out there, and I think there's going to be many people glued to their computers for the next few weeks ploughing through this game. In terms of how much replay you're going to get from this and how long a campaign's going to last, I have to say I don't know, but I'm really looking forward to this game, playing it through all the way through. I'm really curious to see if there's going to be much after launch support for this. Haven't talked to the developers yet about that, but guys, you've been wonderful. I'll see you again in the next video. You take care. All the best.